Hey everybody, I'm Joey Clark,
I'm Elijah Gilbert.
uh, and so in these videos we're talking about the Bible week by week as we go through a chronological Bible reading plan. It's Steinman's. You can Google ESV Chronological Bible. It's Steinman's reading plan. And I just want to preface everything we say in this video and every single video are my views and Elijah's views, our views alone, not associated with any church body, any organization, or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we just decided what better way to teach the Bible than in a chronological sense. And we think it's very important for anyone who's watching to, get a little bit more knowledge about the Bible. So I'm
Yeah.
excited for it.
So Elijah, this plan goes through the Bible chronologically. So that
Mhm.
means we go through in the order in which things happened in the Bible. So some of you, if you've read the Bible a lot, may have noticed that it's not always perfectly in order, and a lot of times you get confused because normally when we read stories, they're in order.
Mhm.
But so you may notice something like, all right, I just read First and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings, and I read this, and then I get to Chronicles, and it's like I'm so confused. I'm reading the same thing. You are, and I'm like, so we're reading the Bible in the order in which things happened, not the order in which things were written. So for example, the Thessalonian letters written by
Yeah.
Paul more than likely have the earliest authorship date of any other New Testament writing. But obviously, Paul's writing about Jesus. The life of Jesus happened before
Hmm.
the events that caused Paul to write Thessalonians.
Yeah.
So it would make no sense to read it in the order it was written. It would be very, very confusing. So you're reading it in the order in which it was happened, not in the order in which it was authored. Um, so reading chronologically gives us a picture of the Bible as a unified narrative. So the Bible is one massive story told through 66 books, and we believe it's a unified narrative that points to Jesus.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so we're going to be reading prophecies and prophetic sermons in the order in which they occurred. Uh, we're going to be reading Paul's epistles in the context of his three missionary journeys. Paul went here, planted this church, did some other stuff. He was over here. He gets some news. He writes a letter back to Thessalonica. He writes a letter back to the church in Ephesus,
Mhm.
etc. Um, so, with that being said, chronology is hard. If you Google it, you might see some slightly different chronologies.
Yeah.
Um, this is, I think, a well-researched one. I like this chronology. But with that being said, it's very granular, it's very detailed.
Mhm.
You might see some weird things. They're probably not typos. So for example, if you look into the plan a little bit later on, you'll see Judges 2 is before Judges 1. Not an accident, not a typo. Uh, it actually, more than like the events of Judges 2 were before the events of Judges 1. Judges 2 talks about Joshua, who in Judges 1 is already dead. Things like that. And why it's written like that, we're not going to get into those issues. Those discussions are best held for Bible scholars in the context of academia.
Mhm.
But if you are interested in that stuff, just hit me up. I can send you resources super quick and easy. I can even talk about it with you. I'm relatively aware a lot of these issues. Certainly not perfect, not an expert in all of them by any means. But overall, we're just trying to get a unified picture of the Bible as it points to Jesus. So,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think he said it perfectly. So the big goal of this is a unified version, but with context behind it. So I think a lot of times when we approach the Bible, we may read something that Jesus or someone acquainted with him has spoken, but we ask ourselves, why did he say this at this exact moment in time? So going through the context, going through it chronologically, I think it sets it up beautifully. I think it gives us a better picture of the actual life of Jesus and why some of the things that we may skip over sometimes are actually the most important pieces in the Bible. So,
Absolutely. Um, so there is a con to reading chronologically. Um, so when a lot of these books were written, um, you read any book really. If you read, any book that's not a series, but like you read, it's like it's this one individual thing. The author's
yeah.
telling one story, he's making one point,
Hmm.
right? the same is true of the books of the Bible. So we kind of dilute the individual point that the author of Genesis or the author of Second Samuel is trying to make
Yeah.
for the sake of having this unified story.
Hmm.
And we think that's okay because a lot of us have never read the Bible chronologically. Um, so reading it in the order that it happened gives us a clearer picture of the entire story.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back in 2027 and read the Bible in canonical order. And that will be an excellent opportunity to talk about, like, this is what the author of Genesis was focused on. Or,
Yeah.
like you brought up the Gospels, look at Jesus' life as like, this is kind of a unified picture of the life of Jesus.
Yeah.
Versus when we go to canonical, I'll be saying things like, this is who Jesus was to Matthew. This is the Jesus Matthew was portraying.
Right. No, I think that's great. Just to stay on the gospel run like you are, obviously the 12 disciples were very important people who were right alongside Jesus, but I would imagine if it was any other 12 sets of people, everyone has a different viewpoint. Everyone sees it from a different lens in a different emotional state at that time. And so us reading it through the unified version is more like, okay, Jesus was like this through all of these people, like what all blends together, not necessarily what is picked and choose from each person and their personal opinions.
Yeah.
So,
There's a great book called Four Portraits, One Jesus. We'll talk about that when we get there. But we like this car crash metaphor.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the car crash metaphor?
yeah, so a car crash metaphor is pretty simple. Let's say there's 4, 5, 6, whatever number, and you're all sitting there and you witness a car crash at the same time. Although there will be similarities, every story will be different in its own way through the eyes of who viewed it when it happened. And so, us reading in a chronological sense, in a unified sense, is like if you took all of those 6 people's viewpoints and pulled them together and said, okay, although that they are different, all of these 6 things still line up. And so that is what we'll focus on when it gets to who Jesus was, not who he was to these people, but who he was throughout the whole entire gospels, and even other aspects that weren't necessarily the gospels.
Sure.
So
Um, so yeah, with that being said, the next episode we do, we're gonna actually start diving into the Bible. So the beginning of the episode, watch it before you start reading that for that week, the first 7 days.
Mhm.
We'll say like, hey, these are some things to make sure you're kind of in the right place.
Yeah.
Looking at the right thing to help prepare you to read, but we won't say too much because we
Yeah.
don't want you to read the Bible through the lens of us. But we'll kind of set you up for success, saying, hey, these are some key things to look at.
Mhm.
And then give you an opportunity to kind of pause the video.
Yeah, 100%.
7 days later, you've read it all, and I'll say these are some things I noticed. Me, Elijah, and in some of these videos, Grace and Mumford will be here,
Yeah.
and we'll all discuss. So that's gonna wrap up our week 0 video.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this, I hope the Lord blesses you and keeps you. I hope the Lord shines His face upon you.